Alright, welcome back to another episode of Emotional Nightmares. I am your host. My name is Tyler. On today's episode, I got with us a guy that I got to know throughout this the program of recovery. I almost slipped up there, right? So with that, I went ahead and I grabbed Brandon with us, so he's going to share with us kind of what it was like and what happened, where he's at today, kind of what guided him to make the change that I hope that you're doing. So, with that, Brandon, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Brandon. I'm an addict, ultimately. So really what I'm going to do here is I'm going to share a little bit about what it was like, what happened, and what life is like now, seeing that I've put in some work to really take a look at myself and change the way that I was living. I've been clean since March 6th of 2022, so I've got like 2.5 years coming up on 3, and
that's awesome,
yeah.
Right? That's awesome.
Yeah,
I never thought I'd see you get that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We'll get there.
Yep. And ultimately, what brought me to that point was on March 5th of 2022, God willing, that is the last day I was ever arrested and put in jail. So, I don't know, man. I'm 31. Well, I'll be 31 middle of October. And, I think I always thought that I had like a pretty normal childhood. My parents were never married, but I was always taken care of. But I do know there was a couple things early on that, looking back, I realized that they're not so normal. So like my parents split up when I was like 8. And I used to hate going with my dad, right? Like, I hated it. He scared me for some reason.
He gave you more discipline?
Not really. I just seen him and my mom fight physically, right?
Okay, that's fair.
Which, like, as a young kid, like, that scared me. You know what I mean? And at the time, I don't think I realized that's what it was.
How old were you?
Like 8.
Okay.
But I do remember one time very specifically, he wanted me to go with him. I told him no, so my mom was like, all right, like, leave. And I remember I was in my bedroom and he crawled through my bedroom window to try and, essentially kidnap me, right? Like, he didn't have any custodial rights at the time. So, like, if I didn't want to go, I didn't have to go. But I do remember that. And, like, looking back, like, I guess that's not normal. But, like, in the time, I had nothing to compare it to, right? Like, I had no comparison of what a normal childhood looked like. But I had a sister to him, and who's older, and I have a brother who's like 4 years older than me. And I was 13, and I remember I smoked weed for the first time with my brother. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I do remember at the time he wasn't living at the house because him and my mom didn't get along, but I do remember I smoked weed with him, and when I did that, I was like, man, this is the place. You know, I remember thinking, like, this is going to be it for the rest of my life, and I share this all the time. There's a song by Cottonmouth Kings, Rest of My Life, and I was like, that's my theme song for the rest of my life.
Not many people know Cottonmouth Kings.
Yeah, right. Like, that's what
that's that old country shit.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, and from then on, man, ultimately, I did. I chose I was going to smoke weed for the rest of my life, and I know around the age of 15, I got a girl pregnant who was older than me. I got my first possession charge at 15, and I became a dad at the age of 16. I know on juvenile probation, I never gave them a single clean urine because I was like, till the death, you know? Like, right. I was not willing to break on that, and they don't appreciate that a whole ton, so I ended up in juvenile placement a couple times. Every time they'd let me out, I'd go right back to smoking weed, drinking, really doing whatever I could.
And this whole time you have a child?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Without a doubt.
Who's taking care of the child?
So from the very beginning, once he was born, I took her for 50-50 custody, so I had 50-50 custody of him. But I lived at my mother's when I was not in placement, so he would go there. So
Okay.
And that's a recurring theme throughout my son's entire life, was like my mom, his grandma, took care of him a lot, right?
Right.
On the time that I was supposed to be taking care of my child. But I do know that somewhere, I must have been 15 or 16, and I share this, and sometimes I feel like maybe it might hurt my brother's feelings or might make him feel a certain way, but like that's just how it is. I do remember one time I woke up to my mom screaming, call 911, because he was overdosed on the bathroom floor. And I remember that night, the look in his eyes, like after 911 had came in and revived him. And I remember how scared my mom was. And I was like, I will never, ever touch heroin. And I'll never use a needle. And like those were two things that I always told myself I would never do, because I seen the damage firsthand that would cause. I know I graduated high school from a juvenile detention center because I just could not quit. I refused to quit smoking weed. I never even tried. I lived in a place a couple hours away. I got kicked out of one, got sent to another, and I lived there till I must have been almost 19. I remember I have a picture of me holding my high school diploma while in front of the courthouse, because I got it when I went to court to hopefully get released. And I did get released. I thought I wanted to help people. Like, that's what I always thought I wanted to do.
That's good, though, right?
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt.
Like, let's not downplay that, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I hate juvenile detention centers, and that's because, like, I grew up in them. But me growing up in them, I saw it was before child abuse, right?
Yeah.
So, like, child abuse, they just beat the shit out of you in juvie. But I will say that without them, I don't know if we would make it as far as we did, right? So, like, you were able to graduate, because, like, I know if it was up to me, I would have dropped out in the 8th grade.
Without a doubt.
Right? But then the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania stepped in and said, absolutely not, right? And they forced me. Now, obviously, I ended up dropping out in the 12th grade and got a GED, but, you know what I mean? Like, you were able to get a high school diploma because of juvie, right? Yeah. Otherwise, maybe not.
I had all intentions of dropping out. The first chance that I got.
Sure.
And juvenile probation and PA was like, no, you're just going to live there, and, like, that's what's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Which makes it harder. So let me cut right here, because we have a huge demographic for some reason between 13 and 17.
Yeah.
I have no idea why I hope they're asking their parents' permission. But if you're watching this and you're in school, fucking stay in school.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Like, I got a master's degree now, but it was so much harder doing it the GED route than what it would have been going directly from high school. And they always tell us, like, oh, you're going to need this diploma. And we see people, because in our active addiction as kids, we see people that they drop down. We're like, nah, they're fine.
Absolutely fine.
No, they're the fuck not, right? Their life's a mess, and they'll tell you too. So, like, if you're watching this and everything, man, fucking stay in school, please. But, all right, go ahead. So you're in the courthouse.
Yeah, and I remember I did get released, and that was the first time they were also going to let me off juvenile probation. And ultimately, it was because I told them exactly what I wanted to do afterwards. I'm like, all right, cool, so now that I have a diploma, like, I'm going to go to college for psychology, because, like, I wanted to be a counselor. That's ultimately, as a kid, that was always what I wanted to do, because I felt unheard and unseen as a kid. And I was like, I could help kids because I understand it, right?
Yeah. Isn't that funny how that we all think like that? That's the only reason why I did this career too. Exact same words.
Yep.
But it's funny.
And so ultimately that is what I did. They released me, and then I went to college for a very short period of time for psychology. And ultimately I was released back into the wild again, real life, right? And I jumped right back into what I was doing, right? And, like, I picked up a pill habit, and I was drinking all the time, and I dropped out of college after, like, 2 or 3 semesters. Also, they make you do goofy shit when you take psychology. Like, you have to do math classes. Mm-hmm. And, like, I thought that was useless.
Only in the beginning.
Right, but I, you know what I mean? I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like, I just want to talk to people, and they're making me do math. Like, this don't make
Core classes.
Yeah, right. But ultimately, it just got in the way of doing what I wanted to do. And it wasn't long after that. I wasn't even 21. I know I caught my first DUI. And I wasn't even drinking and driving. I was at a house party. And a fight broke out. So I went and slept in my car instead of driving home. And then about 4 hours later, I got woke up by OCPD. And they were like, pulled me out. And I'm like, oh, I'm getting an underage. And they were like, we're going to give you a DUI. And I was like, take me to the hospital and take my blood. I thought like maybe it'd give me some more time. But ultimately, I copped a DUI. And I remember thinking after that, I was like, man, if I'm going to get a DUI for trying to be responsible, there will never not be a time in my life where I'm drinking and not drive home. And I know that thinking is not, it makes perfect sense even to me today in my head.
I mean, it makes sense,
yeah.
but like obviously it's not the right decision.
No,
but
at all.
Yeah.
But I remember I think I got ultimately a slap on the wrist, and all those consequences up till then, like to me in my head were like slaps on the wrist, right? Like I never did anything. Like you would think spending over years of my life in like juvenile boot camps and detention centers that like those would be consequences. I loved it. Like I really like those places because for a person like myself, I do great in structured environments, right? And like they had it structured.
How long were you in juvie?
So I spent a couple months in Pathways the first time, a couple months the second time, and then they kicked me out. And I went to Outside In, which was practically just a juvenile boot camp. And I spent 11 and a half months there till I graduated.
So, I mean, unfortunately, right, like what they don't understand with juveniles is like at a young age, we become more institutionalized quicker than what it does like an adult who goes in and out of jail. It takes a little bit longer, but like as a kid, the moment you hit the juvenile system, if you're spending time in there, you know, and for whatever reason, they around here at least, I mean, shit, I ended up in Vision Quest for like 4 years. I mean, they just hand out those numbers for no reason around here for kids being kids. And unfortunately, like, you become institutionalized. So for you to be able to say, like, you know, I do really well in there, I like them, I don't want the viewer to think this guy's a fucking nut job. Like, no, like, kids become quicker, it's quicker and easier for you to become institutionalized with the structure, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and down there, ultimately, like, we ran every other day, and they had full weight rooms, and, like it was a cool place, right?
Yeah.
Like, if they had a summer camp as a kid, I would have went there. You know what I mean? But it was very different when
and they give you good food.
Oh my God, great food. You know? But,
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I got my first DUI, and it was like a slap on the wrist. I don't even remember what it was. Probably 6 months probation, something like that. And so ultimately, I just kept on doing what I was doing. Like obviously, throughout this time, like I used to get my son, and actually it's still the custody order I have today, but like he's a grown man now, so I get him whenever I want. It was Tuesdays and Thursdays from 3 to 9 because I had school till 2:30, so you know what I mean?
Right.
And then overnight on Fridays. And I kept that, regardless of what I was doing for the most part. Like I would always make sure that on those days I was at my mom's house to spend time with my son, right? Was I always absolutely present? Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Because my mind was always looking towards the next place or what I was trying to do. But really, so I had no real consequences. So for a good period of time, like I just kind of, like on probation that time, I ended up walking it off. And then I just kind of kept doing what I was doing.
So at this point, there's still no change. There's like, I'm fine, like everything's all right.
Without a doubt. Now, don't get me wrong. Through every period of trouble, my mom would not hesitate to be like, "You got to do something different."
Sure, but you don't see it.
No, never did. But so then I run through that, right, and like I'm still living at my mom's throughout this whole period of time, right? And then I don't know. I ended up in a long-term relationship. I always kind of held a job, but I never hesitated to tell that job, screw you, I was looking for a job when I found this one and walking out of it. Like, the minute any hiccup or bump or anything that didn't go exactly my way, I was cool off on another job. Like, that's not an issue. And I walked out of some really good jobs that I was making good money then and looking back, like, I would have really been set up for life, but I wasn't concerned about none of that. I always felt like, this is crazy because I don't know if I've ever said this out loud actually. I always felt like I was robbed of a childhood from having a child so early that as I got older, I was like, I got to make up time, you know? And
I mean, I don't think that's crazy. I just had a conversation with somebody that just told me the same thing. Like, now that my kid's an adult, like, I'm going back and reliving what I missed.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that's crazy.
Selfish, maybe. Selfish. That I was doing it while my kid was still
Sure,
a child,
sure.
you know. But yeah, so like, you know, I'd be in a relationship. I was in a long-term relationship for like 5 years, and I know. So I got a second DUI. Must have been around 2004, 2000. No, that's not right. 2015, 2014, 2015. I got a second DUI. I used to work night shift at the dog food plant in Meadville, and I'd get off at 6. I'd go to the bar. My friend owned the bar. She couldn't actually charge me till 7, so I'd drink till 7 anyway. That's not really relevant, but I know that it was like 2 in the afternoon, and I was on my way home from the bar that day, and somehow I got turned around. I do remember hitting a ditch in my car, getting out, being like, oh no, and then my car was fine, and I was like, oh cool, and then I don't remember anything until like a cop was knocking on my window because I was in the middle of the road with my car in drive, completely passed out, and so I got a second DUI, and like I would love to say that the consequences of this one like deterred me, but like it was in Crawford County, and they sentenced me to 10 days in jail on the work release pod, and I had to write a 7-page letter to the people that I had affected, like my mom ultimately, because like she used to drive from her house all the way to Crawford County every night to pick me up, drop me off in Meadville, then drive back and then do the same thing in the morning when she worked the opposite direction. I paid my ex-girlfriend at the time to write the paper for me, $50, and I did the time in the jail, and it was honestly nothing. I did 30 days of house arrest after that and 6 months of probation. I do know the entire time I was on probation, I was snorting Suboxone. I do know that, and I remember the first time I went in, I was like, they're going to put me back in jail because I'm going to give them a dirty urine. And me being the manipulator that I am, I spun it, and I'm like, well, I'm buying them off the street so that I stay off of heroin. And my PO was like, okay, well, as long as you're not doing heroin and you don't pop hot for that, you're fine. And I was like, okay, you know. At that time, I had never even done
crazy.
heroin. Yeah, I had never
That's
even.
crazy.
Yeah, I had never even done heroin. And I remember he was like, you got a prescription for it? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, why not? And I'm like, because I feel like if I get a prescription, then I'll never get off of it, and I'll never stop doing it. And he was like, all right, well, as long as you're not popping hot for heroin. And I remember thinking in my head, like, what an idiot. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. There's your roadway.
Yeah, right. You know, it was never like, oh, maybe I should stop this. It was always like, all right, cool, how can I work my way around this? And so I did 6 months of paper, and I got let off. Never a clean urine. Never gave him a single clean urine. So up until that point, right, I'm like 25 then, maybe 24, 25, and I had never had like a real consequence. Like every time, like I ended up, like I'd have a bump in the road, but ultimately I skated through. Like I was able to manipulate it one way or the other to like get what I wanted ultimately. But I do know that in 2000 it must have been like 2016 when I got like real badly involved in selling meth, right? And like it's a terrible epidemic around here.
Yeah.
It's not getting any better.
The only people that understand that's Arizona.
Yeah, right.
The people in Arizona know that, but around here, people don't understand how big meth really is around here.
It's out of control.
Yeah, it's wild.
But so ultimately, that's what I was doing. Kind of what sent me into like the real consequences, or the real downward spiral where like things got bad fast. October 27th. Well, right around beginning of 2017, I had broken up with my long-term girlfriend of 5 years, and like that shattered me, right? And I kind of rekindled it with like my high school sweetheart, the girl that I'd talked to since I was like 13, and then October 27th of that year, she got murdered, right? And like that sent me into a absolute downward spiral where you would think like being a parent and like all those things would matter, right? Ultimately they didn't. Like that didn't matter to me. None of my responsibilities mattered to me. I pretty much quit working my job and just started selling drugs full time, and I was gone 24/7. I was always on the run, always in my car, going here or there, constantly drinking and getting as high as possible, which ultimately led to my arrest in April of 2018. Possession with intent to deliver, and I don't know, it was like 16 charges. I know so that was the first time I ever spent any time in Venango County Jail. I spent 5 days in there on house arrest, or 5 days in there, and then I got bail. And when I got out, I was like, all right, I got to see court supervision. I'm going to get high one time, and then I'll go back and see them because I have a chance, you know. And that one time turned into now I'm on the run and never went back. And I was on the run for a few months, ultimately, until I wasn't anymore, you know. Yeah, so it was a crazy blowout thing. It was the 5th of July, and I remember I had a giant fight with my girlfriend at the time out in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and I decided I was going to shoot off the 9mm, being an idiot, and a guy came down and was like, I'm going to call the cops. And I'm like, it's a public road, dude. Like, you can go on, get out of here. And he did. He called the cops. So I took off running, right? Well, me and her both took off running, and it was like an 8-hour chase through the woods from the cops. And I got away until the next morning. I got away that night, and then I had went back to my mom's house that wasn't far away, and they thought that I had her in the woods with a gun held hostage is ultimately what they thought. And so she called them from my mom's house and was like, no, I'm fine. And they're like, well, where are you? And she's like, well, we've been in Meadville at my dad's. We don't know what you're talking about. And they were like, okay. But when I woke up the next morning, the state police were at my mom's house ready to arrest me. Because really, she called off the house phone, and they were like, that's weird. We know exactly where you are. So when they picked me up on the warrant and 12 new charges. Tampering with ignition interlock, just a bunch of stuff, right? So when I went into jail that time, I knew I was going to sit for a little while. I thought I'd sit for like 6 to 24 months. Ultimately ended up sitting 11 and a half months, and then I got released a month early to go to rehab for the first time, right? And I went to this little facility right down the road here, and
the little ghetto rehab they can.
Yeah, right, yep. And fun fact, the rehab was a bar before that, and then it got converted to a rehab, which I always thought was pretty ironic. But and ultimately, in my head, I told myself I had 11 and a half months away from drugs and alcohol, and that like I didn't need to hear anything that any of the people there were trying to say. In reality, I was on the work release block in jail, and I was getting high the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, in rehab, you thought you got it.
Yeah, without
you
a doubt.
walked in with the, I got this attitude, and like, even though everybody kept telling you, you're full of shit, you need to listen, you were like, nah, I got this.
Yeah, I was like, bro, I just did, like, I got almost a year in between it, and really I had maybe 30 days, you know.
Which right there, right, is very crucial, right? Because even if it was the 11 months away from it, you know, because I get everybody like this all the time that'll come into rehab. Bro, I've been good. I've been sitting down. You know, I've been not using for 6 months in jail. I'm going to be fine when I get home. I'm like, yeah, we're not, but nobody believes it, so.
Yeah. So like I said, I'd gotten out a month early, or I guess I got out 2 months early, and I got to go to rehab. I went for like 30 days. And then I remember I was out of rehab for like a week, and then I was right back to it. I was getting high again because ultimately I didn't listen to shit anyone had to say in rehab, and I had no real defense against the first one. I remember I went right back to jail on my first dirty urine, which was my original release date. Like, I was originally supposed to get out. It was like June 6th. I got out 2 months early. I went back June 6th, and I sat another 6 months. And then they let me out to go back through rehab. That must have been...
When you were getting high, did you think nobody knew?
No, I don't think I was ever trying to hide it, to be honest.
I mean, clearly not, because, like, I'm going to the store, and I'm like, all right, this dude got a handmade scooter with a U-Haul on the back of it. Like, he's messing around.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, the scooter with the
You
old mechanics creeper on the back for a trailer.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to see you were a United Methodist. You know?
Yeah. I don't think I was ever really trying to hide it. You know what I mean? I was just... The only people that I was trying to hide it from was probation. Everyone else, it was like, cool, I don't really care.
Right.
I had made that... I hate to say this, but I had almost made that my personality for a period of time, which is crazy. But... So, like, I went back to jail for another 6 months, and they let me out on house arrest for a little while, and I went and I lived at my grandma's house in her trailer with her, which was, at the time, like, I was like, man, I don't want to go live in my grandma's one-bedroom trailer with her, but I did, and it was actually great. I got to spend a lot of quality time with my grandmother, who I love very much, and has always been a great support of me, right? And at that time, I kind of, like, on house arrest, they let you go to certain things, right? Like, you can go to different programs for an hour a night or whatever, 6 days a week. So, like, I took advantage of that, and I started going to meetings, right, in different 12-step fellowships, whatever I could get to. And I did that for, even once I got off of house arrest, I did that for like a year straight. But I didn't really take any suggestions from it, right? Like, I just went because it was something to do and it occupied my time. I do know that COVID happened. I was working a job. I was working at the steel mill, and I remember COVID happened, and like, parole wasn't coming around to see you anymore. And at first I was like, cool, I'm just going to drink a little bit here and there. And ultimately, drinking has always been a problem in my life, way before drugs was. Way before. That's always the precursor. Drinking's always the precursor to my problem. And I say it all the time. If I start drinking today, it won't be tomorrow, maybe not the next day, but by the end of next week, I'm going to be getting high. And that's just the progression of it for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember thinking, all right, I'm just going to drink here and there. And I remember the first night I went out, a buddy was like, hey, man, I got some cocaine. I hated doing cocaine. But I was like, yeah, let's do it. You know what I mean? And then I remember waking up the next day and being like, bro, I hate doing that. Why did I even do that? Well, because I can't say no to the first one once I've already got something in me. But after that, I was like, all right, well, I'm already in the rabbit hole, so, like, let's run it. And I ran it for a while. And in that period of time, like, things just progressively got worse, right? Like, I did one of the two things I said I would never do, and, like, I started doing heroin. I was ultimately mixing fentanyl, heroin, and meth while drinking a half a gallon a day every day. And those are extremely deadly combinations. I mean, one of them alone is not good, but all of them together is terrible. And I mean, throughout that period of time until it must have been 2021, I had overdosed multiple times. One of the times that 911 had been called to my apartment, my PO had heard about it, and I didn't know that he heard about it. And he was like, hey, I need you to just come in and sign some paperwork. And I was like, all right. And I went in to sign some paperwork, and he was like, all right, cool. So, like, why was 911 at your house? And I'm like, oh, I was just really drunk and passed out, and they thought I was overdosed, so they Narcaned me. He's like, 6 times. They Narcaned you 6 times because they thought you were passed out drunk. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm like, no. Like, you know, he's like, I'm not an idiot. I'm like, okay. He's like, so you're going to go to rehab right now. I already talked to them. Like, I got you a bed. And I'm like, well, how about you just send me back to jail? Like, how long will I do in jail? Because in my head, I'm like, rehab's going to make me take a look at myself, and I didn't want to do that. Jail, you can just, it's dead time. Ultimately, like, you don't have to put any work in. Like, I'm not saying jail's fun, because it's not, but you can just bid your time out in jail.
It's just a place to sit.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't really, they don't really have any program. Like, there's nothing in there.
Right.
That's
There's no
beneficial.
rehabilitation in jail.
No.
And that's what it
And
is.
to think there is just the most stupidest, ridiculous thing in
Right.
the world.
And he was like, well, you can go to rehab, or I'm going to revoke you on your probation, and I'm going to resentence you to prison time. So, like, you're going to go for probably 2 years. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll go to rehab. And I remember he's like, go straight there. And I'm like, I can't go home and get clothes. And he was like, go straight there. And I'm like, okay. So the minute he let me drive myself, right, which was stupid to begin with. Because originally I'm like, well, it's trout season. Like, let me wait a week to take my kid out trout fishing. Like, it's about, and he was like, no, like, what if you die over the weekend? Then that's on me. And I'm like, I promise I won't. And he's like, dude, you're going today. And I'm like, all right. So when I left there, I went home, obviously, and got as high as I possibly could, right? Packed my clothes, got as high as I could, and then checked myself into rehab again. So that would have been the third time.
Was this the time that you came to our new facility?
No, that wasn't until the last time.
Oh, so you were still coming to the old one?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I was downtown 3 times, and I was at the new one time.
Okay.
So, and I remember Sam was checking me in, and he was like, bro, are you high? And I was like, nah, man, not at all. And he's like, bro, you can't even keep your eyes open. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I just came from parole. And he's like, I'm not an idiot. You know what I mean? I'm like, whatever, Sam. Like, you know. And I remember that time, I know for a fact that I had stashed everything at my house exactly where I wanted it, right? And I was just going to tell everyone there what they wanted to hear, because I didn't want to change nothing. I did not want to change. Like, I didn't want to change anything. I was just waiting until the day I got released. And I do know that I was getting high in rehab that time, right? I had people meet me and bring me stuff, right? And I was getting high in rehab that time. But I did get released from rehab without any issues, right? Because, like, I thought I was smart with it, right? Where I was like, cool, like, I'd been there for about a week, and I'm like, all right, so I have like a week and a half where, like, I can get high. And ultimately I put a ton of people at risk, right? Like, looking back now, I'm like, I put so many people at risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not that I was sharing it with anyone, because I wasn't.
Right.
But like, just like that, even being around it, or like knowing, like, that's putting people at risk, right?
Yeah. Which happens a lot, right? Like, people always assume that when you come to rehab, all is well, and it's not, right? Like, we are not the cure. I can't fix you if you're not willing, number one. And number two, like, I don't care what rehab you go to, it's fucking easy to get drugs in there.
Yeah.
Like, you know, our facility, like, we do our best, but, like, it's still gonna come in. Like, it's not like it's difficult. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, especially the old place. The old place was
yeah, right.
Fucking back door. I mean, it was pretty simple.
Yeah, yeah, without a doubt. And that's nothing to knock on the facilities, right? Because, like, facilities do what they can, right?
Oh, yeah. We get drugs that come into our facility. There's nothing we can do.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, we try.
Yeah. But anyway, I got out that time, and, like, I went right back to it. At first, I was like, cool. Like, I had a bunch at home, and I was like, I'm just going to sell it. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not going to...
The greatest lie we tell ourselves.
Yeah, a monkey selling bananas, you know? And I did that. I remember I got rid of everything that I had, and I was like, wow, I made so much more money than I would normally make if I was getting high on it, you know? And then I got some more, and then I was getting high, you know? And ultimately, I ran that, right? And I just continued to run that until on March 5th, when a couple days before, like, they always say, like, with a head full of recovery and a belly full of beer, like, it just isn't the same. Like, it ruins getting high for you.
Yeah.
And, like, after being through rehab and, like, actually coming around to a program for that entire year in 2019, like, it was ruined, man. Like, nothing about it was enjoyable. I hated every second of it. and this is the irony. I used to sell drugs to people and be like, "There's a better way of life, man. Like, there's a better way of life." And they'd be like, "Then what are you doing?" And I'm like, "I can't get back there." You know, like I just couldn't on my own power, right? And that's the delusion of it, right, that I lived in. But I ran it till the wheels fall off. I know a couple days before March 5th, I had hit a bunch of money gambling because I did that a lot. Just another addiction that like ran rampant in my life. I'd hit like $5,000, and I remember the day before I got arrested. It was like my stepson's. We were having a birthday party for him, and I had been up for like 3 days, but I was cooking food all day. You know what I mean? Like I cooked a bunch of pulled pork and ribs, and like we had a good day, and like the party went off fine, and I was hammered the whole time. You know what I mean? And then that night, me and the woman got into a fight, and I went to a bar in Oil City, and then somewhere else in Oil City, and then I don't remember anything after that until I have a flashlight in my face. And like I kind of come to, and I'm like, "Why are you shining that light in my eyes?" And they're like, "Hey, Brandon," because when you get in trouble enough around a small town, they're fortunate enough to know you by your first name. Yeah. And she's like, "How about Brandon? You tell me what you're doing." And I was like, I look down, I have one shoe on in the pouring rain. My foot's bleeding, and I'm like, I would assume I'm looking for my shoe. She did not find it funny. I kind of chuckled. And she's like, "All right, cool. Well, how about you put your hands behind your back?" And I'm like, "All right." And I remember as she's putting me in the police car, she's like, "Is this your unicycle in the bush?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's my unicycle." I don't know why I had my unicycle in the pouring down rain. I don't know what. I do not know. I really don't know. Yeah, I know. It's crazy. She's like, "You on parole?" I'm like, "You know I'm on parole." She's like, "All right, well, they're going to put a 48 on you, and we're going to take you in." And I'm like, "You know that's not real. Like, in Venango County, they don't put a 48-hour detainer on you. They put a 48-week detainer on you, and that's just what they do." As they should. As they should. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, they do their job like they should.
Not always. You can say it.
Yeah,
it's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
For the majority of the
They
part,
fuck everybody sometimes.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Okay.
Yeah,
it's
without
okay.
a doubt.
We don't care what the county thinks of these.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, yeah.
Like, what are you going to do?
I've come to find that most, I will say most, parole agents have your best interests at heart.
Absolutely. There are some. Zachariah is fucking amazing.
Yeah.
Right? Like, she's awesome.
But, so, I mean, I went back to jail, and I remember she's like, "No, they're going to let you out tomorrow." And I was like, "No, they're not." And I wasn't even through holding when they were like, "Yeah, put a permanent on him." You know what I mean? And like I knew that was the case on the way in. So I was running through it, and I sat in jail for, I don't know, like 3 months that time with a new charge, and it sounds terrible. And it's always funny when I say it because it's loitering and prowling at nighttime, and it just sounds not good. You know what I mean? And a criminal mischief. And
Meanwhile, you're just riding a unicycle high.
At 5 in the morning. Yeah, right. Yep. The loitering and prowling is because I was in someone's yard. You know what I mean?
Right.
But whatever. And the prowling's because it was 5 in the morning. There's like a certain hour between the night where it's like then it's loitering and prowling. So, but I remember that was the new charge. It came with like a year of probation, and I was like, okay, that's nothing. But they were resentenced me on the PWID from 2018, and I was like, that's where I'm really concerned because like I thought I was going to go to prison. And I remember when I went in front of the judge, and she was like, so what were you doing like out there before you got arrested? And I told her like how I had reapplied to the Carpenters Union because I thought that was going to pull me out of what I was doing, and like I was trying to do these things for my life to get better, but like I just ultimately couldn't, right? And she was like, all right, cool. I remember when I went into jail that time, I talked to my mom and the woman, and they were like, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm not asking for rehab. I've been there enough times. Like, I'm not going back. But I'm going to get out and I'm going to work a program. And the judge was like, all right, cool. What do you think about rehab? And I was like, and she's like, well, you're going anyway, you know? And I'm like, oh, okay. Then like, yeah, rehab's fine, you know? So I'd sat like 4 months, and then they sent me back to rehab for the 4th time, right? The 4th time in 4 years, right? Which, so like a trip a year, you know, that's not terrible.
It's not good.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not. And ultimately, I just had to come back to check out the new facility, right? Like
Yeah.
that's no. I do remember when I got picked up to go to rehab that last time. I stopped at the jail and I got my unicycle, which was hilarious. When I walked in, they were like, "Oh, Brandon, good to see you. Like, let's see you ride that thing out of here." I'm like, "I'm just gonna carry it." Like, you know what I mean? And then I went to rehab for hopefully the last time. And honestly, that time through rehab, like I like to believe like I actually wanted to like I was really tired of the way that I was living, right? So like I in my head buckled down and was like, all right, cool. This is what I've seen what works for other people, and like I know what works. So like I'm gonna sit here, I'm gonna take this time, I'm gonna actually listen, and like when I get out, I'm gonna do what actually works. And
You did.
Yeah.
I'll say that your final trip through, your attitude was different. Like you came in that time and was. It's funny because like we always talk about, at least in this field, we always talk about eventually you'll work with somebody long enough where you'll see the lights click on, right? And it was like that click on moment where it was like you wanted to fight it, but at the same time you were just like, what the fuck am I gonna do?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's that gift of desperation, ultimately, right? You know what I mean?
That it is.
Like I had nothing else. Like I had nothing left. And then when I got out, that's what I did. Like I got into a 12-step fellowship, right? And I put the boots to the ground, right? And at first, like there were some things that I wanted to do to get back to my life. Like I wanted to reapply for the Carpenters Union and like do all that shit. And ultimately, I was like, maybe I should wait. So like I got a job local. I'm actually still working with that gentleman now. And I mean, I make good money, but it's not about the money, right? My boss is in recovery for like 17 years, right? Which makes it great, you know what I mean? Because like there are times like we have recovery in the park here in Franklin, you know what I mean? And I'm able to be like, hey man, I want to take a half a day to like go to recovery in the park and like support recovery in the area. And he's like, absolutely, you know what I mean? Because he understands and like he gets it. But ultimately, I put my boots on the ground, and like I got into a 12-step fellowship, and I took suggestions, and like I started actually working the program, and like really digging into like what part I played in it all, right? Because like ultimately for me, that's what it comes down to is like if I'm able to break down what part I play in the situation, then like I'm able to come out the other side of it.
So finally taking fucking accountability.
Yeah, and that's
right?
that's ultimately
It's such
what it
a
is.
huge word to be able to sit down and say, wait a minute, even though that, you know, I talk about this all the time with people, is like, even though there's bad situations, and even though people do us wrong, right, we have to look at what did I do in every situation, because for every action there's a reaction. So did I cause this chain of events? Like, what did I do? Where's my part in it, right? And for taking that responsibility, I mean, that's huge to be able to do that.
Yeah, and it's crazy because, like, even people in normal society, like, most normal people, like, are not willing to take any type of accountability for their actions.
No, absolutely
it's not.
not.
Just drug addicts or people with trauma or, like, it's just people in general.
Well, yeah, and I'm a firm believer. I think everybody has trauma. Right, to a degree, right? Like there's levels to this shit, and like, but that's, I mean, to your point, man, like that's huge. Is like, you know, even normal people will be like, oh well, I was in this relationship and like she cheated on me, and I'm like, right, but I'm not saying she's right, but there's more to the situation. Like, how did you get there? Right, like, you know, I was in a relationship, girl cheated on me. I'm not saying she's wrong. I'm not saying she's right. And like when I break it down, I'm like, I can understand why she did what she did. Doesn't mean I'm willing to forgive her, right? But I can take responsibility for that, make changes so that I'm not that toxic when I get into another relationship.
Yeah. Yep.
And people are unable to do that sometimes.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's that looking at ourselves, right? It's like, I know for my entire life, I avoided looking at myself in the mirror, right? Just because, like...
Which is what the 12 steps do.
Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, it's that unboxing of of self, right? And like that's what I love about it. But so ultimately that's what I did, right? I got into it and like I started doing that, and like through the process, not only have I not picked up drugs or alcohol, which is like something that I never in a million years would have thought I'd be able to do, right? Like I've been able to like really find a sense of self, which is something that I didn't even know that I was really missing. And like I'm able to be, so like my son now is 14, right? Which is like crazy when I think about it, you know, because I'm only 30, and I'm like, that's crazy. He's taller than me now. He weighs more than me. Like, if he knew how to throw a punch, he might be able to take me. Luckily, he can't throw a punch, so I'll always be able to take him. But like, I develop a relationship with him today, right? Like a real relationship, not just like, oh, okay, Dad was there physically. Like, I'm able to be there emotionally and mentally and like spiritually, or like however he needs, right? Him and my stepson were at Paulie's the other day getting ice cream, and we were like having a conversation about like, what do you think all this is, right? Ultimately, like, what's a higher power to you, and like, what's God to you, and like all these things, right? And we were like having a conversation about that, which is wild, like to have that conversation with my child. And a woman came up and she's like, I'm a professor at Allegheny. I'd love to have you guys up there sometime if you ever go to college, you know? And I'm like, oh, cool, thanks, you know? Like, I'm not going back to college, I don't think, but like maybe he will someday. And I don't know, man. Like, I go to work every day, even though let me rephrase that. I like my job and I like what I do, right? It gives me a sense of purpose, and I genuinely enjoy it. That's what I'm going to do for the rest of my life, I believe. But I hate getting up in the morning, right? Like getting up and going to work. But I do that on a consistent basis, right? I've worked for this gentleman for a little over 2 years, I guess. And I haven't called off one time, which is uncharacteristic of me, right? I'm reliable and I'm dependable today. I do a lot of service, right? Like I do because my sponsor, right, instilled that in me in the beginning. He was like, service is like paramount to make sure that you get outside of self. I'm not saying service so that I don't have to look at myself, but like once I look at myself to be able to do service. So that's a huge thing for me.
I think service makes you look at yourself even more.
Yeah, without a doubt.
When you start working with somebody else, you start seeing your own shit, and you're like, fuck, man.
Yeah.
Now I understand. Like, you're like telling them, like, well, this is what's the matter. Like, you need to, then you're like, fuck, I need to take this advice. You know what I mean?
Without a doubt. I was just going over with someone the other day, a situation about fear. I'm like, well, that's clearly fear, like, rolling that. And then I'm like, damn, like, this situation in my life right now, I'm like, ultimately what's stopping me from making the next move is, like, 10 forms of fear.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, that's crazy. But I don't know, man. Like, life is great today. Like, ultimately, like, I get to do some things that I enjoy that I didn't even know I enjoyed, or, like, so, like, today I have a new hobby, right? And, like, I used to go to meetings for over an entire year. I went to meetings 7 days a week because I was available to do that. And then after that, like, I started to incorporate a couple days a week some things that, like, I thought that I would like, right? Like, I was always really physical as a kid, like a physical kid, and so, like, I started doing jiu-jitsu, right? And I do that a couple days a week now, right? And I love it. Like, I absolutely love it. It trains my mind and my body, and, like, those are two things that are paramount for me. I don't know, man. Like, I get to spend a lot of time.
I mean, that's good, right?
Oh,
Because,
without a doubt.
like, shit like that, like, is one of the things we always, you know, I always try to tell people, like, find something that you really enjoy, and I bet you that you'll see your mind change.
Yeah.
Right? Like, so getting into something like that, that is very crucial for your mental health. Because the correlation between that, like, in your mental health, I bet you if you quit doing it for about 2-3 months, you'll be like, damn, why am I so snappy at people?
Yep, without a doubt.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. But I can overdo it too, right? Like, I as with anything.
I blew out my rotator cuff because I overdid working out. So, like, I get it.
And like ultimately that's what it was. Like I was working out, and then I was like, man, it's just not doing anything for up here. And I'm like, and then I got into that, and like, so like I know I'm doing a competition on the 12th. I just did a competition like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And then I'm going to do one on the 26th, and then I'm going to do one on the 9th, right? A 2-week turnaround between them all, which may be a little much. But as long as I don't get hurt in one, like I'll be fine. I don't know, man. Like I get to do practically whatever I want. Yeah, and like there's a freedom that comes with that. I know I get off parole in like next year sometime, January I think. It doesn't really matter to me at this point. You know what I mean? Like my parole officer's like, go wherever, do whatever. I don't want to see your name in the paper, and I'm like, cool, you won't. You know what I mean? Like I have zero intentions of that happening.
Right.
But I don't know, man. The fact that it's crazy that the people that get put in front of me on my journey, right, that like have been able to help me along the way, and like even you being one of them, right, like whether you know it or think it or not, right, like you would be one of the earlier people in my recovery journey when like I actually like not just like okay the consequences and I had to quit getting high, but like even though that first time through rehab, like I didn't want to hear none of that shit, ultimately like you'd be one of the first ones along that journey, right? Which is just crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know you heard some of it. I know that because you had about a fit when I told you were a piece of shit father.
Yeah, right.
Until I broke it down, and you were
Yeah.
like, "Fuck you."
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
good, right? Because like ultimately, that's the reception I want.
Yeah.
Is for you to be able to say "fuck you."
Yeah, I wasn't unreceptive to hearing it. I was just unreceptive to accepting it. You know
Sure,
what I mean?
sure,
Like, that's
sure.
the difference, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good though, man. Like you've come a long way. Like I know, if I'm being honest, I didn't think you would go this far, right? Because it was
Yeah.
like even your last time through, I was, I remember because when we discharge somebody, so we don't just discharge, right? It's like a big team thing, and like I remember just sitting there being like, I mean, I think he's come as far as we're gonna get him, and I think that like he gets it, but like I think he'll be back. You know what I mean? And like you never came back, right? And
Yeah.
like that's awesome to see. That always makes me excited when when people are coming into rehab and they're like, I got phone numbers. I'm like, oh, cool. Who'd you get? I got this guy named Brandon. I'm like, yeah, fucking talk to him, right?
Yeah.
So like I'm proud of you, man. It's awesome to see the progression of when the lights kick on. It's
Hell yeah.
cool.
I appreciate that.
So, you got anything else you want to add to it?
I don't think so.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate you coming on. So, as always, like I say on everything here, is like you could have been anywhere in the world today, but you chose to sit here with us for an hour. And in that time frame, I hope that you heard something that'll help you stay sober just one more day. At the end of the day, it's all you need. If you can just stay sober today, tomorrow is going to look a little bit better. Please reach out and talk to somebody. These drugs ain't no joke, man. They're killing people left and right. So if you're struggling, there's help. Get it, seek it, and keep coming back. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you for watching.